My op-ed over at HartmannReport.com today is, I think it's one of the better ones I've written here in a long time. It's titled, Citizens United Has Destroyed America. Why is nobody talking about it? And, you know, I start out by talking about this show, this program that, we've got, according to Talkers Magazine, around 6 million listeners a week. And, what I'm hearing increasingly from you, in your calls is, I don't want to say despair, but frustration bordering on despair about the inability of our country to get basic necessary things done. I mean, people say, why is it that we can't do something about guns when we have all these mass shootings? Why is it that we can't do something about homelessness when there are several times more empty houses and apartments in America than there are homeless people? Why can't we have affordable health care in the United States? Why do we pay twice as much as any other country on earth? Why can't we have good quality public education? Why is it that now 4 red states have offered vouchers statewide to everybody in an effort to shut down and destroy their public schools? And you know that once the public schools are gone, they're going to dial back on the generosity of these vouchers. This is all about making money for the private school industry. It's just like the private prison industry. How did social media get excused from responsibility for its own content and become overrun by Putin bots and Nazis? Why are we moving so slowly on climate change? Every single one of these issues tracks back to Citizens United. Every single one. This all started in 1976 when James Buckley, William F. Buckley's older brother, I believe he's older, he was the senator from New York, the Republican senator from New York. And he wanted to be able to he was a multi-millionaire. He wanted to be able to use his own money in his campaign to basically wipe out his opponent. And federal election law at the time in 1978 or 1976 said, no, you can't do that. There are limits on how much money anybody can spend, including the candidate himself. So he took this to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, hey, it's your money. You can do whatever the hell you want with it. And the rationale that they used was that without billionaires being able to put money into politics, and get this is amazing. Without billionaires putting money into politics, quote, or let me rephrase that. Their rationale was that restrictions on rich people buying political office, quote, this is a quote from the Buckley case in 1976, necessarily reduce the quantity of expression by restricting the number of issues discussed, the depth of the exploration, and the size of the audience reached. This is because virtually every means of communicating ideas in today's mass society requires the expenditure of money, end quote. In other words, the Supreme Court said, if you're a billionaire or a multimillionaire and you want to pour money into politics, that's going to help politics. Because, we'll have a discussion, a more in-depth discussion, more topics. Because the money is going to expand political discussion. Which raises the immediate question, okay, that's fine for the top 1, 2, 3% of Americans who can afford to, throw thousands of dollars a year or millions of dollars a year into politics. But what about the 97%? What about the rest of us? Our free speech is pretty much limited to how loud we can stand out in front of our house and yell. It's limited to our ability, our ability to vote, I guess, is a form of speech. Our ability to say something on social media, but what about our right to have our political views aired? Well, the Supreme Court had no interest in discussing that in 1976. So James Buckley won that case, and the Supreme Court, for the first time in the history of the United States, legalized rich people basically owning politics. 2 years later, in 1978, in First National Bank versus Bellotti, they did it again. They said, this is true of corporations as well. If corporations want to put money into politics, no problem. And then in 2010, they tripled down on this and overturned hundreds of American laws, nationwide, state and federal laws, and just gutted any protection that Americans have against rich people, against billionaires basically owning our political systems. So now we have a situation where every single Republican in the House of Representatives, and most of them in the Senate, frankly, are terrified of the billionaires and the industries that can harm them. And every Republican in the House of Representatives is there. I mean, they're just like, please don't ask us to restrict guns. The gun manufacturers will pay for advertising for our primary opponents. Please don't ask us to do something about Medicare Advantage ripping people off. The health insurance companies will devastate us in the next primary. I mean, it doesn't take, in a primary election for the House of Representatives, $500,000 is enough to take a person down in most parts of the country. It doesn't take a lot of money. When you've got an industry, the health insurance industry, for example, is making literally $1 billion a week in profits, probably. I don't know the exact number, but I'd be amazed if it wasn't at least $1 billion a week. They can easily peel off $500,000. Chump change. That's like pennies in the couch, right? They can easily peel off $500,000 or $1 million to take down some politician who decides he wants to do something about Medicare Advantage. Or guns. The gun industry is making billions. They can do the same thing. I mean, it just goes on and on, right? The fossil fuel industry, making billions. They own every Republican. In fact, Sheldon Whitehouse, I found this on his website last night. Sheldon Whitehouse points out that prior to 2010, keep in mind, 2010 was Citizens United. Prior to the Citizens United decision, Republicans were actually in favor of doing something about climate change. Seriously. John McCain ran for president on doing something about climate change. He said, quote, "While we cannot say with 100% confidence what will happen in the future, we do know the emission of greenhouse gases is not healthy for the climate. As many of the top scientists throughout the world have stated, the sooner we start to reduce these emissions, the better off we'll be in the future." He was the lead co-sponsor for the Climate Stewardship Act, which had other Republican co-sponsors. The Clean Air Planning Act was supported by Republican Senators Lamar Alexander, Lindsey Graham, and Susan Collins. Republican Senator Olympia Snowe was the lead co-sponsor of the Global Warming Reduction Act of 2007. Multiple Republicans supported the Low Carbon Economy Act and the Clean Air Climate Change Act. In 2009, Republicans supported the Raise Wages, Cut Carbon Act and the Waxman-Markey Carbon Cap and Trade proposal. Maine Republican Susan Collins was the lead sponsor of the Carbon Limits and Energy for America's Renewal Act. She said, Republican Susan Collins said, in the United States alone, emissions of the primary greenhouse gas carbon dioxide have gone up more than 20% since 1990. Clearly, climate change is a daunting environmental challenge. And then came 2010, and everything changed. Clarence Thomas, who'd been groomed for over a decade by right-wing billionaires and fossil fuel billionaires, the Koch brothers, had been groomed for this, became the deciding vote on Citizens United, legalizing bribery of not only politicians, but also federal judges like Clarence Thomas himself. And once the fossil fuel industry could pour unlimited amounts of money into either supporting Republicans who deny climate change or destroying Republicans who assert climate change, once that happened, the entire Republican Party went silent on climate change. Sheldon Whitehouse on the floor of the Senate, quote, "I believe we lost the ability to address climate change in a bipartisan way because of the evils of the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision." Amen. So if we want to do anything, if we want to do anything about student debt, if we want to do anything about the quality of our schools, if we want to do anything about health care, if we want to do anything about climate change, if we want to do anything about, banks and airlines ripping us off with fees and things, if we want to do anything that takes on any major industry, we have to overturn Citizens United. That has to be done first. We nearly did that. We nearly took a bite out of Citizens United last year, 2022, with the For the People Act. And had not Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema been on the take, we would have done it. But instead, they voted with the Republicans to filibuster the For the People Act, and here we are. Because of 2 corrupt Democrats and 50 corrupt Republicans. It's amazing.